Hello, and thank you for joining us again at Voice of Rohingya Radio, a registered nonprofit media broadcast coming to you from the state of Oregon in the United States of America. We act as the media wing of the Arakan Rohingya Union, providing exclusive interviews, reports from inside the border, and the latest news from reputable sources from around the world. We'd like to ask you to take a moment and go to www.vorradio.org for up-to-date news and information concerning this program and how you can get involved. Voice of Rohingya Radio is the only news source of its kind in the English-speaking world. You can learn more about the Rohingya cause by supporting us today, and we'll continue bringing you the latest news in a convenient format and keeping you informed and involved. You can listen to our program each week, Sundays at 7 p.m. Pacific Time, and if you're interested in sponsoring our program, simply log on to our website or send us an email to support@vorradio.org. It is March 1st, 2015. For Voice of Rohingya Radio, I'm your host, Zach Taylor. In our top story tonight, Maung Maung Thon, Director General of the National Registration Department, told 11 Media on Thursday that further processing of temporary identification cards, or white cards, has to follow the instruction of the government's Analyzing Commission, which will contain experts. However, according to the DG, the commission has not yet been formed. The presidential office's order includes registering, withdrawing the expired cards, and scrutinizing the white cards. The white cards will expire on the 31st of this month, and the expired cards need to be withdrawn by the 31st of May. Further processing has to be done by the Ministry of Immigration and Population in line with the instruction of the commission. Currently, there are over 590,000 white cards, or temporary national identity card holders, including Bengalis, Indians, Pakistanis, Chinese, and Myanmar ethnic people living near the borders, according to Ken Yee, Minister of the Immigration and Population Ministry. Some white card holders remain to be scrutinized in line with the 1982 citizenship law. Maung Maung Thon said the ministry had opened offices nationwide in order to accept the expired white cards. Our sources on the ground are saying the process of revoking the white cards is already underway in Maung Da. Some days ago, the Maung Da Township Administration Office issued a letter with the heading, "To discuss with local Bengali community leaders for citizenship verification matters." This letter was sent to different ward chairmen of Maung Da. 10 Rohingya from each ward were to be invited to the meeting. The discussion was held last Saturday with some 60 local Rohingya elders in attendance. The township administration officer and an official from the district immigration office gave speeches and explained the proposed government plan to issue a kind of nationality card after collecting the white cards. The immigration officer did not answer questions concerning what the new cards would mean for Rohingya. The officer was also unable to promise that any identification would be issued in place of the white cards in the interim. At the end of the meeting, 15 attendants were selected and taken to the office of the district administration officer, where he told the audience that high-level government officials have good intentions for the Muslim community of Rakhine State and that everyone should take the opportunity to cooperate. Further, he warned the attendees not to miss this chance of obtaining citizenship, saying who comes first will benefit first. When asked about the future of around 1,000 Rohingya students from Maung Da district who have yet to finish their graduation courses due to expulsion based on their ethnicity, the DOA said that it was a matter of security, adding that mixed ethnicities in the university would not be possible as violence could erupt and spread elsewhere. He also argued that the government could not ensure the safety of Muslim students, as there is not enough funding available for such a purpose. When asked if the government would be interested in establishing a college in Maung Da district, he answered that it would take time. Since the communal violence of June 2012, Rohingya students have been deprived of studying higher education after passing their 10th grade examination. Hundreds of students are now languishing at home, and a widespread desperation among parents subsists with no foreseeable solution. Our sources say the government is deliberately ignoring Rohingya education. The DOA said that a curfew is still in effect for at least 2 months, citing violence by intruders from Bangladesh in southern villages of Maung Da. He pointed out that to provide a new kind of citizenship card, verification would be needed, saying that during the repatriation processes in 1978 and 1992, Bangladeshis had infiltrated the populace by mingling with actual refugees and were erroneously issued Myanmar resident documents. According to our sources, those comments irked the audience, but counter-questions were not posed. The computer and photocopier shops in Maung Da have been doing record business as every household is frantically making duplicate copies of their white cards before surrendering them to the immigration department. One source concluded that a climate of insecurity is prevalent among all Rohingyas, that an even gloomier future is looming. In other news, representatives from the European Rohingya Council attended the 7th Annual Geneva Summit for Human Rights and Democracy held on Tuesday. More than 200 human rights activists, former political prisoners, and NGOs from all parts of the world attended the conference. Speakers talked about the ongoing human rights violations on Burmese Muslims committed by Buddhist nationalists, and the role of the government in perpetuating this persecution was also discussed. Speakers also discussed the failure of the United Nations to take any decisive steps to counter the ongoing rights violations in the world. The Rohingya representatives to the summit, Muhammad Ibrahim, General Secretary of the ERC, and Osman Johar, Council Member and International Lobby Group of ERC, also met up with government and international NGO representatives to discuss the persecution of Rohingya Muslims. The organizers have promised them that next year they shall host a summit exclusively for Rohingyas. The Geneva Summit for Human Rights and Democracy assembles hundreds of dissidents and human rights victims, activists, diplomats, journalists, and student leaders yearly to shine a spotlight on urgent human rights situations that require global attention. During the United Nations Human Rights Council's main session, 2 days will be exclusively allocated to discussing the human rights situation in Burma. ERC representatives are expected to attend. The Conference of Future Democracy in Burma, titled The Plight of Oppressed Minority, was held at the University of Technology in Malaysia on Thursday. The conference was organized by the Malaysian Consulative Council of Islamic Organization, My Fellow Education Malaysia, and the Faculty of Islamic Civilization. The conference served as a platform for NGOs, academics, activists, and young leaders, as well as the public, to understand and discuss the current situation in Myanmar, especially on the issue of the Rohingya Muslim minority. Among the various speakers, the OIC Special Envoy to Myanmar urged the ASEAN countries to remain active in their role of helping Myanmar achieve democracy. He said 3 countries, namely Indonesia, Malaysia, and Brunei, had their own strengths, and the OIC believed they could all play a role. We play the role not to force, but to ensure that the voice of humanity in Myanmar is taken into account and recognized, because this is not just a question of politics, religion, and racism in the country, but a question of humanity. Speaking to reporters Thursday, the former foreign minister said, "We hope that the democratic process is often discussed in the media, whether locally or internationally, so that we can persuade the Myanmar government to ensure democracy in that country." The special envoy said at the OIC level that although there was a proposal to open an office in Myanmar, that time had not yet come for it to be realized yet, but that he will continue to work with them so that the humanitarian aid given by various countries could be channeled to the people of Myanmar, not only the Rohingya Muslims, but also to areas populated by Buddhists. Some 150 participants from various countries, including Indonesia, Thailand, and Myanmar, joined the one-day conference that explored the issue of minorities in Myanmar. Arakan Rohingya Union Director General Dr. Waqar Uddin is on his way back to the U.S. after attending the anti-terrorism conference in Saudi Arabia last week. He said in the conference that the Rohingya people are committed to non-violence and seek peace and harmony with other ethnic groups in Burma, adding that the Rohingya minority is the only ethnic group in the country without an armed insurgency group. After arriving in the United States, he is planning to meet with the newly appointed Ambassador-at-Large for Religious Freedom, David Saperstein, in Washington, D.C. Secretary of State John Kerry said the new Religious Freedom Ambassador will have direct access to him anytime. You are listening to Voice of Rohingya Radio. Thanks again for listening to Voice of Rohingya Radio, your source for Rohingya news. We'd like to remind you to visit vorradio.org, where you can get involved and show your support. The United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights said Wednesday that Myanmar must end the widespread abuse of minority rights in order to keep on its progression toward becoming a democratic state. He stated that the recent abuses of minority rights, freedom of expression, and peaceful protests have led the country backwards. Earlier this month, Myanmar President Thein Sein called for the expiration of white cards held mostly by ethnic minorities who cannot obtain citizenship under the country's discriminatory citizenship laws. According to Zaid, the move appears designed to prevent white card holders from voting in the upcoming constitutional referendum and state elections later this year. During an election year, it will be tempting for some politicians to fan the flames of prejudice for electoral gain, the High Commissioner said. But at a time when religious extremism is creating havoc in many parts of the world, the terrible consequences of appealing to or appeasing such sentiments should be all too clear. A new democratic Myanmar should be built on the strength of its diversity. Zaid also said that the Rohingyas have been victims of many violent attacks. He seemed particularly bothered by 4 new laws before the Parliament of Myanmar that are discriminatory towards religious minorities and women, breaching international standards of freedom of religion. The commissioner was also disturbed by the 2 attacks in 1 week on Red Cross convoys in the conflicted area of Koh Kang. He estimated that tens of thousands of people have been displaced by the conflict. Zaid stated that for the progression towards a democratic state to continue, those who have violated human rights need to be held accountable, and the current violence in the country needs to end. In early February, before the president decided that all white cards would expire, Myanmar's legislature passed a new law granting temporary citizens the right to vote in a constitutional referendum later in the year. In November, Myanmar's parliament announced that it will consider amending the country's 2008 constitution, following talks between Sein and top army officials and opposition leaders. In February of last year, Fortify Rights, an independent human rights group based in Southeast Asia, issued a 79-page report claiming evidence that the Myanmar government ordered policy discrimination against Rohingya Muslims. The Burmese government's announcement of the imminent suspension of all temporary ID cards held by over 500,000 Rohingya is dashing hopes they might be allowed to vote in Burma's first general election in over 50 years, according to an article in Foreign Policy. The proposal to grant the Rohingya voting rights, aggressively promoted by Burma's ruling Union Solidarity and Development Party and passed by Parliament on February 2nd, has been seen as a flicker of hope for the stateless Muslim minority squeezed into apartheid-like conditions near the Bangladeshi border. But President Thein Sein quickly bowed to a growing Buddhist protest movement and withdrew his support. A spokesperson for the U.S. government criticized his decision as counter to reconciliation in Rakhine State, where outbursts of religious violence between Rakhine Buddhists and Rohingya Muslims have claimed dozens of lives since 2012. The reality is that the proposal was never more than a cynical political ploy to harness votes for the military-aligned USDP ahead of the highly anticipated elections. The government's rapid U-turn only exposed its two-faced policy towards the Rohingya. Indeed, the military and its proxy parties have simultaneously suppressed and courted the Rohingya vote since 2008, when the military welcomed their support to help rig a referendum approving a controversial new constitution. In the flawed 2010 election, many stateless Rohingya were offered the prospect of citizenship in exchange for casting their ballots for the USDP, which subsequently grasped power in the 3 Muslim-majority constituencies in northern Rakhine State. Once in office, however, President Thein Sein's government quickly forgot these commitments. There are currently 6 ethnic Rohingya legislators representing the USDP in northern Rakhine, 3 at the state and 3 at the national level. These politicians, who took up their posts promising to secure greater rights and freedoms for their people, have proven troublesome for the ruling party. Shui Maung, a Rohingya member of the National Parliament, has drawn considerable ire for his unapologetic activism on behalf of his constituency. Last year, a presidential spokesman accused him of defamation for implicating local police officers in an alleged massacre of Rohingya in the western town of Maungda. Nonetheless, in 2010, the Rohingya vote was essentially to the USDP, with nearly half of its legislators in Rakhine elected by the minority, while several more seats were obtained through electoral fraud. The USDP's overtures to the Rohingya also provoked hostility from the Buddhist-majority ethnic Rakhine, another minority group long persecuted by the military junta, who mostly view the Rohingya as illegal immigrants from neighboring Bangladesh and see the government's courting of their vote as a betrayal of their state for political profit. Buoyed by hostility toward the Burman-dominated military, a nationalist Rakhine party, now known as the RNP, won a majority of seats in the national and regional parliaments. The RNP and other Rakhine nationalist parties have since spearheaded efforts to marginalize and disenfranchise the Rohingya. With its new influence in parliament, the RNP has successfully pushed through a law banning undocumented Rohingya from forming political parties. As in 2010, the RNP now poses a significant electoral threat to the USDP in Rakhine State, where the ruling party is likely to lose most of its remaining seats in the 2015 poll without the Rohingya vote. This is why the USDP once again turned briefly to the Rohingya in an effort to attract voters in this region this year. This is not, of course, without a small tinge of irony, considering the government's oppression of the minority, who Thein Sein has repeatedly threatened to deport from Burma. Unfortunately, a tide of Buddhist nationalism has now made it more politically profitable to vilify the Rohingya than to woo them for their votes. Since the 2012 violence, the unpopular minority has become a rallying tool for both ethnic Rakhine and Burman political parties, boosted by a nationwide crusade to defend Buddhism against Islam. The government has never recognized the term Rohingya and has been accused of complicity in a campaign of ethnic cleansing against the minority. Thein Sein has even publicly defended the country's most venomous hate preacher, Ashin Warathu, who has likened Muslims to mad dogs. The military, which has a long history of pitting the country's myriad ethnic and religious groups against each other, has even less incentive to support the reviled minority. Since 2012, ethnic Rakhine have welcomed thousands of Burmese troops into the rest of state to maintain security. The military's role has been amplified by persistent rumors, often repeated by the government, that Rohingya separatists are now active along the Bangladeshi border. The threat of instability and violence may thus serve as an alternate strategy to boost the army's popularity in Rakhine and defend its grip over Burmese politics. Shui Maung, one of the Rohingya lawmakers from Rakhine, concedes that the USDP leadership may have another plan in place for winning support in Rakhine. He says he feels betrayed by the government and will not stand in the 2015 elections unless temporary ID or white card holders are allowed to vote, which looks to be very unlikely. The idea of using the Rohingyas as pawns rather than allies seems to have permeated the opposition party as well. Democracy icon Aung San Suu Kyi's party, the National League for Democracy, also fought against the bid to enfranchise the Rohingya, with one of the party's lawmakers dismissing the proposal as inconsistent with other legislation. It is not the first time the Nobel laureate has drawn criticism for her silence in the oppression of the Rohingya or Burma's escalating anti-Muslim sentiments. In December, the NLD fired one of its leaders for making a public speech criticizing the proliferation of Buddhist extremism. He is now facing a 3-year jail sentence for insulting the religion. Suu Kyi has never spoken in his support. Her silence has been widely interpreted as a Machiavellian gambit designed to avoid controversy ahead of the 2015 elections, that assuming it is free and fair, her party is expected to win by a landslide. The upsurge in religious hostility, which has claimed hundreds of mostly Muslim lives across the country since 2012, is seen by some as a manufactured attempt to fracture her popular support base. Either way, Suu Kyi, like her uninformed opponents, seems to have prioritized political cunning over human rights. As Burma's historic elections draw nearer, it is becoming increasingly clear that the Rohingya have little to gain from the country's political transition, which ended 5 decades of military rule in 2011. Neither the ruling party nor the opposition has ever been genuinely interested in promoting their rights. Thanks again for listening to Voice of Rohingya Radio, a weekly news program bringing you up-to-date information about the Rohingya people in Myanmar. You can catch our broadcast every Sunday night at 7 p.m. Pacific Time here in the United States by logging on to vorradio.org, or you can join our page on Facebook to find more information on the program. For Voice of Rohingya Radio, this is Zach Taylor, signing out.